All right, welcome everybody to this special edition of Beyond Geopolitics, where I am very happy to be joined by my good friend Vanessa Beeley, who has been an astounding journalist on the ground in Syria, now in Lebanon for obvious reasons, and has been reporting on a day-to-day basis on her Telegram channel, on her Substack, on UK Column, where she does fantastic regular updates on the world strategic program, moment to moment. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining me. I got a question here.
Thanks for having me back on, Matt. It's nice to be speaking with you again. It's been a while.
Well, you're really on the front lines, and so few people. I mean, I'm separated by I'm a world away, trying to make sense of what's going on moment to moment, following various channels. But you're actually there. You're on the ground. You're talking to people. You've been on the front lines also in Syria, reporting on the situation there, all the way up until Bashar al-Assad was backstabbed, the Syrian people were backstabbed, and now you have Al-Qaeda-run Syria. And Lebanon, where you're currently based, is also sort of caught in the crosshairs. I'd read just a few days ago, Israeli forces began an invasion, have been putting out warnings to people living in southern Lebanon to make a move fast, get out, obviously alluding to the fact that something disastrous is being planned. How are you doing? How are you reading this? How are things on your end?
Well, really, yeah, you're right. I think it was yesterday or the day before. All the days are kind of merging into one at the moment. The Zionist forces tried to basically enter southern Lebanon from 15 points. There have been fierce battles raging anyway on the border area between the Hezbollah resistance and the IDF. And then at the same time, actually, they've carried out two helicopter operations coming in from Syrian territory into the eastern Bekaa area. There have been a number of massacres actually carried out, particularly last night, by the entry of these helicopters. And the day before, the helicopters had entered Lebanese airspace and then dropped special commandos who allegedly were there to retrieve the body of a fallen Israeli soldier from back in the 80s. But of course, at the same time, what this is effectively is a probing of the defenses in the eastern border territory in Lebanon. Testing, I think, for a weakness, if there's any chance for Jolani's or Ahmed al-Sharaa, as people now know him since he was rebranded, but the former ISIS member who then started Al-Qaeda or Nusra Front in Syria and really has never left his Al-Qaeda ISIS roots. So effectively, there was an ambush both times. The first time they pushed back the commandos, the special forces, and also unbelievably, because the warplanes, we heard them come even over us. We're flying at a very low altitude. Just by using the kind of man-powered air defense that Hezbollah have, they managed to actually push them away from being able to bomb or from being able to create the belt of fire, as they call it, to give the commandos cover to retreat, I presume, back into Syrian territory, which is kind of interesting because now Syria is effectively being used to launch missiles against all protagonists in the war, including Iran, Iraq, Yemen probably in the future, and now is being used to launch attacks against Lebanon. So that is all ongoing. I think to put it into context, people need to understand that since November 2024, when the alleged ceasefire came into effect between Lebanon and Israel, Israel has violated, I think it's between 5,000 to 6,000 times on a daily basis. They've been carrying out assassinations, further destruction of homes in the south and in the eastern sectors in Bekaa and Baalbek, and had taken control of territory inside Lebanon, the 5 highest points where they'd established surveillance centers and military outposts. And they had basically burned a lot of the agricultural and forestry land in the south. Then recently they've been seen spraying it with glyphosate, and they've also been doing the same thing in Syria to effectively environmentally render the agricultural land unable to be used for growing anything, basically, for some time through contamination. And of course, the use of incendiary bombs and white phosphorus. So all of this has been going on for 15 months. And Hezbollah has effectively maintained the ceasefire. They haven't responded. And everyone was kind of saying, oh, Hezbollah is finished. They're not going to be able to do anything anyway. And that's why they're quiet. They're not responding. And then Trump and Israel murdered Imam Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader in Iran, and members of his family and members of his close command. And at that point, of course, there was a massive response from basically the Shia Muslim communities in this region and further afield. You're looking at Africa, India, there have been uprisings because Ayatollah Khamenei is what is known as a Marja. So he's one of the holiest spiritual leaders within the entire Shia Muslim global community. And so therefore, at that point, there is also information that's been coming out recently that Israel anyway was planning to effectively invade and destroy all of the south. So I think there were a number of reasons. I think Hezbollah took a preemptive decision to basically join the war against Israel and Israeli settlements in coordination with Iran, because the point of them working in coordination is that they saturate the ability of Israel and the air defense systems to actually intercept drones and missiles when they're launched in such big numbers, both from Iran and from Hezbollah. And actually recently we've seen far fewer interceptors being fired when waves of Iranian missiles are coming in. And you're also seeing Iran using less missiles. And I don't think that's because they're running out. I think it's because they now understand that more missiles are going to get through. There's less need to saturate the Israeli air defense systems. And we'll come on to that. But they've effectively done a very good job of blinding the US and Israel in the Arab Zionist Gulf states by taking out the radars, the early warning systems, and so on.
Yeah, and you, in your recent UK column update, had a really useful list of various radar systems that had been taken out, these early warning systems, the biggest of which being Qatar, as you pointed out, was called the all-seeing eye with a 5,000 kilometer range. And without these eyes being able to observe the entire Iron Dome, which was celebrated as this like almost magical force field, didn't really even work when it was at 100% functionality. It completely doesn't work at this point. So these are all very strategic maneuvers. I see it. But before I get onto more questions based on what you said regarding the situation in Iran, in Lebanon, what is the relationship right now between Hezbollah, which I know there was like an order that was put forth. I don't think it was really respected from President Aoun and the government in Beirut. It's telling Hezbollah to disarm. What is the relationship of the Hezbollah to the rest of the Lebanese government? And I don't understand it very well.
I live here, and it's difficult enough for me to understand it, so I'm fully sympathetic with that. But basically, the Taif Agreement, which I think was 1989, effectively ensured that the government would really be powerless because it's designed to be a coalition government with everyone having an equal say, which is impossible. You can't run a country like that because decisions are never made, because you're endlessly in meetings trying to get the kind of the majority vote your way, right? And of course, Hezbollah, the Shia Muslims are about 50% of Lebanese population, which is an important factor to take into account. Hezbollah is actually very popular. The political party has always had a large majority within the Lebanese government. Of course, now they've recently assassinated Mohammed Rad, who is the head of the political wing of Hezbollah. So clearly they're trying to also weaken the political side of Hezbollah. And yeah, you're right. Since the ceasefire came into effect, there have been efforts by Nawaf Salam, the Prime Minister, and President Aoun to effectively disarm Hezbollah and to use the army against Hezbollah to do so. Well, this is already kind of, it's a lost game plan immediately, because the families in the south, for example, they might have a brother in the army and they'll have a brother in Hezbollah. And probably 40% of the army is Shia. And then you have elements within the army that are Sunni that still support the resistance, or Christian and still support the resistance. Right. So it becomes, it's kind of, the problem is that the government now is so captured by Washington, Israel, and by Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is being used to blackmail them, saying if you don't do X, Y, Z, then we're not going to provide money for reconstruction, we're not going to shore up the economy, et cetera, right? And I think that the Lebanese economy is it was just a giant Ponzi scheme for so many years that it's never really recovered from that. There isn't any effective central banking system, because everything really is divided into the sects in Lebanon that kind of all have their own banking systems, including Hezbollah. Very little is actually governed by the government, as it would be in any kind of functioning country, although there's very few functioning countries left in the world today, as far as I can work out. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, just to come back to your question. So effectively, yes, the government has been trying on and off to bring about the disarmament of Hezbollah. But I mean, it's an impossibility. One, you have now Takfiri elements, or Al-Qaeda or ISIS, on the border with Lebanon. That's already one threat. Then you have the threat from Israel, which is a very clear one. Now, today, for the first time, they've bombed pretty much central Beirut under the pretext of bombing Hezbollah's banking system. And then added to which, it's the United States that sponsors the Lebanese army. But they sponsor them to a level where they're not capable of defending the country. While they're supplying billions upon billions to Israel in defense capability and weapons and the most sophisticated air power. The Lebanese army has Cessna. That's it. They gave them, I think, 1 or 2 Cessnas. That's it. All of their equipment is ancient. I mean, they're not capable of defending anything, to be quite honest. They're more of a security police force. So if you remove Hezbollah, which is the only effective resistance force here, whether it's against Syria or whether it's against Israel, it doesn't matter. Then you have nothing. Then Israel can march into Lebanon, take the territory that it wants, take control of everything that it wants to take control of, just as it did in Syria after December 2024.
Absolutely. And obviously the greater Israel agenda that was, I think, really amplified over the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, the clean break doctrine that came in 96, calling for basically regime change as the new primary modus operandi for the Christian Zionist sort of alliance. From that point forward, the idea really of accelerating greater Israel as an agenda has always been on the front burner. And now we're really seeing it, question also of like how proxies are used, like the Kurds. I noticed that there's been recent indication signal that Kurdish separatists are being activated again in Iran and other places, but especially in Iran, to help for this broader war against Iran. But then at the same measure, Syrian Kurds have also been putting out messaging to their Iranian co-Kurds saying, "Hey,
now." Yeah.
yeah, like we kind of fell for this and it blew up in our faces. Don't do this. But where do you think where do you see the Kurds in the role that they play? And do you think that they're wise enough to avoid falling into the same traps that they fell into when they were promised certain things that they were never going to be given to overthrow Bashar al-Assad?
The problem is that historically they've fallen for it time and time again. I mean, really, they shouldn't have fallen for it in Syria, right? I'm not entirely convinced that Trump has totally abandoned the Kurds in Syria. I have a theory on this. I have a theory that he wanted Jolani to release the ISIS elements in the northeast to take control of the prisons and the ISIS elements. One, to bolster the forces of Jolani in Syria, but also to transport them. I think it's 5,000 now have been taken to so-called detention centers inside Iraq, where, of course, I'm sure they can break out of those yet again with a little bit of help from the US military or MEK or the Kurds, right? And yes, the Kurds did collaborate with ISIS on a number of occasions inside Syria. If someone's picked up on that and gone, but the Kurds were fighting ISIS. They kind of were. I see all of these groups as kind of mafia cartels. So they'll intersect when it's of benefit to both of them. And then they'll compete over resources, status, money, funding, etc. That's very much what we saw in Syria, even in some of the suburbs of Damascus or Aleppo. You would see various groups in control of certain areas, but when it came to fighting against the Syrian Arab army, they would come together. But when it came to actually taking control of financing and commerce and so on in those areas, they would fight. Definitely, they would fight. So that's very much how I see it. I'm not sure that the Kurds haven't been pushed up into the top corner of the northeast of Syria in the hope that they can be reused against Iran. That's my theory on this. I don't think they've been completely abandoned, because you see Trump saying one thing and then you see someone like Lindsey Graham saying another thing, and Lindsey Graham is basically saying anyone that's attacking the Kurds should be sanctioned. Well, hang on, you've just lifted the sanctions off Jolani. It becomes ridiculous. So in the end of the day, I don't listen to anything they say. I just work it out from a kind of geopolitical, what is useful, what isn't useful at this given time. And we're going to see a lot of shifting on that as well. So I think the fact that the Syrian Kurds are kind of saying, yeah, don't fall for it. And I've seen Trump now backing off as well and kind of saying, oh, no, we won't use them, blah, blah, blah. That was in the last 24 hours. But we've seen so much of this. Trump backs off and then Israel steps in, and then Trump says, whoa, we can't leave Israel all alone, so we'll join in and bomb XYZ, right? This is the kind of good cop, bad cop routine that they're running between them. Recently, I think, when was it? It was before the 28th, when the bombardment of Iran started. There was a coalition formed in Iranian Kurdistan between 5 factions, separatist factions there, with their mission to be to overthrow the government, or as they call it, the regime, of course. And then at the same time, there was a documentary released by the Israelis, which showed Mossad training the Kurdish separatists to overthrow the Iranian regime. And of course, the January protests, Mossad and Netanyahu, all of them were very open about the fact that they were providing weapons. They were training these separatist factions and other people for these protests, basically. And so therefore, I tend to not listen to the white noise, because we're getting a lot of that at the moment. And I tend to think, no, they're not going to do a ground invasion. Iranian terrain, Iranian terrain is impossible. It's such a mountainous country on almost every border. So they will probably, if they're going to do anything, they will deploy internal factions, whether that's the Baloch freedom movement in Balochistan, which also then brings in Pakistan, the Kurdish separatists, and also the Iranian Kurdish separatists that are in the Iraqi Kurdistan region. And then in that region, you also have Mujahideen al-Khalq, MEK.
Are they still a factor? I mean, I know that they used to
Mm,
be a real bane in the side of the Iranian government a long time ago, but and I
yeah,
think that they were on a U.S. terrorist list and Western terrorist list for a period, and then they were just all of a sudden removed from the
not
terrorist
really.
list. Now they're the good guys again. So yeah,
Yeah,
they're
John Bolton and Rudy Giuliani have been pushing them for a long time, I would
yeah.
say.
Okay.
Uh,
So what about the sense of your contacts? You got a pretty good sense of what's going on in Iran, the pulse of the Iranian people. A lot of Western media is showcasing stories about how happy Iranians are, usually featuring a lot of the expat Iranian community, celebrating, this is the time of freedom finally from the evil mullahs. But then nobody really talks about what do people actually feel who live in Iran. 90 million people live in Iran. What's the tempo? What's the feeling of the people there right now?
well, you know what? Even after the riots, that of course were blown out of all proportion, just as they were in 2022, just as they were in Syria, just as they were elsewhere in the world, when regime changes on the cards. We saw millions take to the streets in Tehran, but also across all the cities of Iran in support for the government and the military and the security forces. And again, we have to remember, you'll hear numbers like 30,000, 36,000. Well, all of these numbers were coming in from, what was it, the HRANA and the HRAI, which is Human Rights Activists Iran. Now, you would assume they're in Iran. They're in Fairfax, Virginia, and they're funded by the NED. So, this is another CIA cutout that is effectively producing the numbers that are then picked up by CNN, BBC, Channel 4, and all of these channels. And this is a playbook we've seen rolled out time and time again. And really, we shouldn't still be falling for it, And then, of course, you have Iranians in diaspora that allegedly want the monarchy back, the monarchy that established the SAVAK torture committees. And I've visited Evin prison in Tehran. It's horrific. And those diaspora are then, guess what are they doing? Just like the Syrian diaspora funded by the United States. They're calling for more sanctions. They're calling for the killing of their own people. They're effectively enabling what is now happening, and that includes the slaughter of the children, the girls, students in the school, Minab school, the attack on Gandhi Hospital in Tehran, the attacks on the ambulances, on the paramedics. And, it's the same playbook again. It's exactly what we saw inside Gaza. The worst thing now for me, and it was the same in Syria, I have so-called Iranians actually calling for this mass slaughter of their own people and starvation and blockade and isolationism of their own people. And it happened in Yemen, 2015, when Mansour Hadi actually resigned his post as president when he'd already overrun his GCC mandate. And then he left Aden, went to Saudi Arabia and said, bomb them all. So this is, it shouldn't be happening. It really shouldn't be happening again. We see it every single time. Same in Syria. Where are those diaspora Syrians now? Are they back in Syria? No, of course they're not. And if Iran, I think it was Lindsey Graham at the Munich Security Conference, he effectively said, we don't really care what happens after we achieve regime change. It's going to be better than having the mullahs. But one thing I will say about the Trump administration, they are honest. They do say as evil as it is, they're honest. They say what they want. He actually said, who cares really what happens after regime change? Well, take a look at Syria, take a look at Afghanistan, take a look at Iraq, take a look at Libya to know what will happen in Iran. And none of those Iranians in diaspora are going to go back.
Look, Lindsey Graham has promised that they're going to install a friendly government in Tehran, and this is going to be the nightmare of China because we're going to now control
Ah,
30%, a third of the world's oil and energy. So don't worry, it's all under control. China will have nightmares. Friendly government will be in Tehran. That's Lindsey Graham knows what he's talking about, right? I mean, he's only been wrong every single time he's opened his mouth for the
well,
last
yeah.
30 years in politics. Um, and it boggles the mind, with the whole track record of death and murder and destruction of lives everywhere the U.S. military industrial complex has touched on the map. The
Mm,
same pattern, the same formula is applied yet again, and people, talking heads in the media, people who consume the media as if it's somehow any indication of truth, including people
mm,
who have families in that area, still continue to fall
mm.
into the same psychological profiling and support this thing. And we've seen this from also anti-war MAGA groups, right? The reason why MAGA originally became a thing in the first place was because Americans we thought they were sick of war and sick of the US acting like an empire. So you had this like convergence of Bernie Sanders supporters and disenchanted Republicans come together, and the language at first sounded good. And then here we are, we're seeing this alchemical transformation of all these anti war people into the good old neocon profile, rah-rahing invasions and wars in Iran, which they were,
Kidnappings of presidents.
it's wild. But
Yeah.
we have a new Ayatollah, a grand Ayatollah, right? We put billions of dollars into overthrowing, into killing Ayatollah Khamenei, and now we have as
His son.
Ayatollah Khamenei, his son, right? Is now been
Yeah.
selected. He's been brought in. What's your assessment of this gentleman, and where do you think? Do you think that he represents a shift in paradigm or attitude from his father, or like what does this mean exactly for Iran and for the West, for those attacking
Um,
Iran?
yeah, I mean, again, it's a bit soon. I haven't really picked up on a lot of analysis of his background. But having said that, the few people that have commented immediately was like, oh, well, he's a lot more hardline. So it's going to be a huge regret, I think, from Trump's perspective and even from the Israeli perspective, unless, of course, and we can talk about that in a minute, if they're following the lead of the Christian Zionists and they're effectively looking to light the fire in Iran, which is going to lead to Armageddon and which is then going to lead to the return of the Messiah and so on. That is an element in this. And the fact that Pete Hegseth is very much pushing that narrative, I think Trump's administration is jam-packed full of Christian Zionists. I mean, you've only got to listen to Mike Huckabee, who's the US ambassador to Israel, who's far more under the jackboot of Israel than he is of the United States, and how the rhetoric of the US administration now is far more in defense of Israel than it is of its own population. So for me, I mean, again, he has a military background. He fought in the Iran-Iraq war. He has also an IRGC background and a BASIJ, so the Security and Intelligence Services. So he has a pretty kind of strong military background, just as Imam Khamenei had before him, his father, by the way, also. And so he's a hands-on leader again, and I would say very resolute. And look, Iran has ultimately done its best to adhere to the negotiation track. And as you know, the foreign minister Araghchi, I said, I think it was yesterday, every time we've gone to the negotiation table, you attack us. So why on earth would we return to a negotiation table with any of you while you're effectively destroying our country? You're targeting our children. You're targeting our, the toxic waste in the sky over Tehran now after they bombed the oil facility, right? And again, this is such familiar territory, but in my opinion, I can't historically think of a country that's gone back as hard as Iran has against the United States and Israel, two genuinely nuclear states that are now throwing everything at Iran, and they're not succeeding. They're doing huge damage. And, that brings us on to the potential for the use of nuclear weapons, not by the United States, but by Israel.
Yeah, that is so. Just to speak to that a little bit, Iran's resilience is quite miraculous, having been the most sanctioned nation in the world for so many decades. And I mean, a lot of people don't understand why there are hardships economically in Iran because they're not paying attention to the fact that Iran is the most sanctioned country in the world. There is tertiary, punitive sanctions for countries that are doing businesses from another country that are doing businesses with another country that are doing businesses with Iran, and you're getting sanctioned.
Yeah.
How difficult is that to just breathe and get oxygen? So the fact that they have been able to still navigate through that type and develop an internal supply chain, manufacturing base, it's astoundingly impressive.
Yeah, it is.
So that, and to also not to be provoked so many times, as we know that these Third Temple eschatologists have been desirous of doing everything possible. It's like, just poke the beast and to try to get Iran to react emotionally out of a sense of justice and revenge. And they haven't done it. So the amount of withholding is extremely mature compared to the type of hot-headed discourse we see coming out of the West. It's quite something. But you brought up we're talking about the Temple Mount, these end times figures, the idea of Israel, which does have illegally begotten nuclear warheads. The exact number, who exactly knows? I heard it's 100. Some people say 200. I don't know. But they've got them.
No idea.
No.
Yeah, they have them for sure.
They might use
and they
them.
also have the Samson option, which is an existential threat which was put in force in 2005 under Begin, which if they face an existential threat to the existence of Israel in this region, they reserve the right to use nuclear. And that is within the option. It even says even against allied territories.
Even against allied territories. So, okay, you have Samson doctrine that's directed towards everybody, including their so-called allies, to be murdered by nuclear weapons on a whim. You have things like Pete Hegseth. I mean, I was startled about a year ago when I first saw this, but this is from 2017. I'm going to play this for people who might be a little confused what we're talking about. I think some people watching geopolitical shows are not used to also incorporating end times fanaticism in their calculus. But I'm going to just show this little 2-minute clip by Pete Hegseth to make this visceral for people. 2017, the moment the U.S. moves their embassy to Jerusalem, and he's talking about something startling. So here it is.
Jennifer and I and others had a chance to go see the Western Wall of the Temple Mount, the Western Wall tunnels, so much of the old city. And as you stand there, you can't help but behold the miracle before you. And it got me thinking about another miracle that I hope all of you don't see too far away. Because 1917 was a miracle, 1948 was a miracle, 1967 was a miracle, 2017, the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital was a miracle, and there's no reason why the miracle of the reestablishment of the temple on the Temple Mount is not possible. I don't know how it would.
Well, I'll keep playing it, but that's just insane that this is the guy who was elevated to become the defense secretary. No, sorry, the secretary of war. As it's
sorry, yes, I was going to say.
Well, let's keep playing. Let's hear what else he had to say about that.
Happen. You don't know how it would happen, but I know that it could happen. That's all I know. And a step in that process, a step in every process, is the recognition that facts and activities on the ground truly matter. And that's why going and visiting Judea and Samaria, understanding that sovereignty, the very sovereignty of Israeli soil, in Israeli cities, locations, is a critical next step to showing the world that this is the land for Jews and the land of Israel. And I believe, as was mentioned, he said you need to, what was mentioned is you need to buy the ticket. Don't just wish for 40 years to win the lottery, buy the ticket. I would submit to you, in light of the support you have in Washington, D.C., the support you have amongst patriotic Americans, amongst evangelical Christians, amongst believers, amongst Republicans, even amongst some Democrats who can barely say it anymore in Washington, buy the ticket, take your action, do what needs to be done here in Israel, because I truly believe this is a moment where America will have your back. You have Donald Trump in the White House. You have Mike Pence as vice president. You have Nikki Haley at the UN. You have true believers in Israel and America that have your back.
Buy the ticket. Of course, comes down always to the question of, now, can we have your money, please? but what do you?
Yeah, exactly. And also, I love that 2017. I didn't realize he said "we have your back" then, because of course that's his catchphrase now. It's like, yeah, we're sending you to die. Right, under Iranian bombs, but don't worry, we have your back. It's just, I mean, I don't know. I just
there's so many fallacies. How many fallacies can you pack into 2 minutes? It's
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, surely a donkey award of some sort. But that being said, the miracles. So he brought up several miracles. 1917 is a miracle. When British imperial
1948.
48. Yeah, I thought these were like British imperial operations to geopolitically screw up the world.
Much.
But no, those are miracles from God, clearly. And now we're on the verge of another
67, which was Israeli land grab in Palestine and Egypt, of course, in the Sinai.
And ignore like the USS Liberty that got bombed with like 36
of course.
US soldiers.
No. We don't
killed.
mention that. That's a minor point. Don't worry about
that's not for polite
dead
society
Americans.
to talk. Yeah. And now we got the third temple. So maybe could you speak a little bit about some of this eschatology, this third temple thing? Like how are you processing
this?
I
think you'd probably be better at that. I don't I'm not an expert on any of that. I do on the ground stuff, Matt.
Well, it's
all insane as far as I'm concerned. It's just
do you find that when you go to Iran, when you're speaking to your friends in Syria and Lebanon, do people living there appreciate this aspect of the psycho? Yeah, they do. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, because actually, effectively, I think Christianity, Islam, and Judaism all have this concept of the second coming. For the Christians, it's Jesus Christ. For the Jews, it's the Messiah. For Muslims, it's the Mahdi, which is, I think, kind of similar to all of to Christianity and Judaism. But the difference is that the Zionists and the Christian Zionists, which is a kind of oxymoron in itself, you can't have a Christian that's a Zionist.
Wait. Why? Just to elaborate on that.
Because Zionism itself is a political movement. It actually, if you look at what Zionist is, it's a supremacist, elitist movement, very similar to Nazism, very similar. And there is a huge crossover. I think we've talked about this before between Zionism and Nazism. I mean, they collaborated in Ukraine. Simon Petler, the first president of the Ukrainian Republic, actually collaborated with Jabotinsky, who was one of the founders of Zionism, of what is it known as? Revisionist Zionism. And actually, Netanyahu is a follower of revisionist Zionism, which believes in colonialism, displacement, greater Israel, effectively expansionism of the Zionist movement, which is definitely what we're seeing right now globally. We're seeing the takeover of the Zionist movement. If you look at, I'm digressing a little bit, I'll come back. But if you look at what's happening with the Abraham Accords, if you look at what's happening with now the Isaac Accords in Latin America, the expansion is vast. Africa, Christian Zionism has been weaponized in Africa because already Africa was very much converted to Christianity through the missionary movement. And so now the Christian Zionists, rather than the Jewish Zionists, are taking control in a lot of Africa. But you can't have it because, as I said, Zionism is divorced from religion to a huge extent, even though there is a huge majority of world Jews that do support Zionism, either hardcore or a kind of light Zionism, where perhaps they object to the genocide, but they still see Israel as their homeland, right? So there's varying degrees of it, but I think it's 80% support Israel as their homeland, therefore they support Zionism.
Right. Yeah.
You can't, it just doesn't make sense, you know?
Oh, yeah, I know. And I mean, just some of the core principles, if you're going to be like, you're going to walk the walk as a Christian, you got to adopt the idea that what Jesus is saying was about ethical behavior, loving your neighbor, even loving your enemy.
Yeah.
These are things that you got to take seriously, and to do the things that the Zionists have been doing as far as trying to redefine sovereignty around some ethno-nationalist, expansionist, entity that can literally cleanse an area like the Nakba of the people who had been living there, which involves doing things that are atrocious for those who have been living there for centuries and millennia. Yeah. That's not very Christian, like you said. It doesn't really work if you want to walk the walk in both cases. So you got that.
No, so it doesn't. Yeah, no, go on. It doesn't represent actually any of the principles of the three religions. There are, and you know this better than me, there are perversions and distortions of the core religions in each of the three, right? From Islam perspective, of course, you have, again, the British generated Ikhwan, Muslim Brotherhood, which again is another branch of political Islam, but still adheres to a very kind of ethno-supremacist ideology. You have the British creation of Saudi Arabia effectively as a Wahhabi domain, at the same time as they were creating, as they were signing the Balfour Agreement with the Rothschilds, they were allowing Abdulaziz Al Saud to basically take over Saudi Arabia, even the western sectors, Hijaz, where there was resistance against abandoning Palestine and resistance against British dominance in the region. And so what did they do? They just basically funded the House of Saud to take over with their Wahhabi doctrine. And that's how Saudi Arabia was brought into the Zionist bloc fold. And ever since has been effectively a protectionist entity for the Zionists, just as the rest of I call them the Zionist Gulf states, not the Arab Gulf states, because no one here considers them to be Arab because they're aligned with the Zionist agenda, UAE in particular.
Yes. Do you think that there is anything within these client states that are hosting U.S. military bases that are playing such a dangerous game? Like, and Iran has told so many of their fellow Gulf states, like all around, that, hey, look, we'll give you a little bit of a chance here. Get the U.S. military bases out of your country, and we won't have to target you. I know Azerbaijan also was given a certain ultimatum. Yeah. Do you see any signs of life that maybe the existential threat that's now upon us from a variety of reasons might impress upon certain people within, let's say, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, Azerbaijan, other places, to follow that advice? Or do you think that there's nothing there you can see as far as competence?
I think, look, they're incredibly vulnerable. Right. Iran currently is effectively destroying or incapacitating the American bases and the American defense systems, the American military. What was it? The Al-Udeid base in Kuwait this morning was hit really badly, the helicopter base. Their entire communications network, their supply warehouses, etc., were bombed. But it's not only this. When you look at the fact that now what they depend upon to survive, which is oil, is now also being targeted, right? In the sense that with the Hormuz Strait closing, I can't remember, I think there's about 3,000 ships now that are basically, in a log jam in the Hormuz. Kuwait has just announced a force majeure on its oil exports. Saudi Arabia, the same. Qatar's LNG hub has shut down completely, and even Iraq is reducing output. Even China now is stopping export of oil. I think it has 3 to 4 months of reserves. And then you have the desalination plants, because they've just targeted a desalination plant, whether it was UAE, I think it is itself, or the American base in the UAE that targeted one of the desalination plants in Iran. Dude, if you hit the desalination plants in the Gulf states, what are they going to do? They don't have water. None. And desalination is not a very efficient way anyway to produce fresh water. But, they're they're effectively being put under sanctions now by Iran. And they're being told, unless you kick out the American bases, many of them are leaving, by the way. I mean, there's been footage of American planes leaving, probably for Jordan. But I think also internally, they're going to have problems, because I mentioned how Britain basically converted Saudi Arabia to a Wahhabi state. But there is still resistance in Hijaz, in the Western areas, that have been protesting. Same in Bahrain. We've seen the crackdown on the protests there. And there are Shia communities in all of these countries. There's 260 million Shia Muslims globally, and many of them in these countries. So in my opinion, and I think the risk is quite high also in India and in Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan is majority Shia.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in India too, I don't know if you've been following this, but Modi has been playing a bit of a dangerous game as well, having had met Benjamin Netanyahu just 2 days before the war began, and calling for the India, Europe, Middle East economic corridor being the thing behind India-Israeli relations in the 20th century, and some weird discussion about some weird Israel-India-led NATO-like art system that they're discussed in some think tanks.
Well, yes. And Israel is providing them with more sharing of technology, because I just skimmed through that agreement, than they do with the US. But then if you look at it, Mumbai is the starting point of the India-Middle East economic corridor. So India is pivotal to this taking control of the economic and trade corridors, right? And if we look at what happened in the lead up to the war against Iran, so Trump has effectively secured the Panama Canal. He's managed to quash Chinese interest there to some extent, even though I know it was a private company, but still it was most likely being subsidized by the Chinese government, because most of these big companies that are expanding globally and setting up organizations and companies do generally receive subsidies from the Chinese government. But okay, so he's re-grabbed Panama. He's effectively taken back control of Latin America through the kidnapping of Maduro very early on in January, the blockade of Cuba. And as I said, the Isaac Accords, which is now, I think, what is it? Honduras, Uruguay, Argentina, obviously, and a couple of others. And he's also done a deal with Erdogan in Turkey for lifting the blockade on the Bosphorus Straits, which will, in Trump's view, give him back control of the Black Sea, reduce Russian dominance of the Black Sea, and send LNG and energy supplies from Ukraine through Turkey and then into Europe. They've been working on Israeli settlement back in Cyprus, which is another kind of node in the economic corridors for delivery of energy. Obviously, Syria has gone, so you've got that launch pad to Cyprus and Europe, and plus you've got the Levant gas reserves off the coast of Syria, Lebanon, Palestine. And then now you've got, what is he effectively, the war is closing down the Hormuz Strait. I'm kind of thinking out loud now.
Yeah.
So what's that effectively doing? That's impacting on everyone. It's going to impact on China because Trump has already taken the basically the control of the Venezuelan oil, right? And there's massive price peaks now. I mean, Russia is actually benefiting from them because Russia is one of the oil and energy suppliers that is now going to benefit from a short-term price hike in oil. China is losing its discounted oil supply. I'm not saying it's essential to China, but it's losing that discounted supply from Venezuela and Iran. Then, so that's the Hormuz. Then you've got, there's the Caspian Sea, which actually has always been a target of Russia since the beginning of the 19th century. Russia has wanted control of northern Iran and of the Caspian Sea to have a warm water port. Going back in history, Russia has, whether it's Russia or the Soviet Union or even Putin to a lesser degree, they have always had their eye on control of the Caspian Sea and control of northern Iran. I mean, I think the Russo-Iranian wars in the early 1800s, then the British Soviet collaboration to divide Iran up in 1907, then post-World War I, Russia was funding separatists in the north. And then post-World War II, you effectively had the invasion of northern Iran. So at the moment, we're seeing, and I forgot Greenland, of course, which would then potentially, although I think that would be extremely difficult because that is very much Russia's sphere of influence. But it's very clear to me what Trump is trying to achieve through this. And of course, with the backing of the entire Pax Judaica to push forward with this and to get full control of world resources, including water, because for Israel also it's incredibly important to have water supply. That's why they took the Golan territory and kept hold of it, because it supplies 30% of Israel's water needs.
Vanessa, we could talk about so many things, and I hope we do actually. There's so many other points as you're speaking that I want to bring up, but maybe we can schedule more follow-up chats in the weeks ahead, because this was a very sobering overview of the world, how we got here, where we're going. And I'm very sad to say that I agree with everything you've just said. So we do have certainly a small window. Obviously, nuclear bombs have not started dropping. At that point, if that should be permitted to happen, it's a different ball game. These kinds of conversations that you and I are enjoying right now are probably not going to be a thing. We do know that there are examples throughout history of times when human beings didn't allow their heads to stay up their asses too long, and we're able to actually avoid falling into these destructive dark age traps. Right now, Iran is rising to the occasion. They're certainly not allowing themselves to just keel over. I'm curious, do you, as sort of final words here, do you think that do you feel any sense of hope that uh, that enough sobriety might hit because of the sort of drunken party we've been in for so many generations, especially since the murder of JFK? We've just allowed ourselves to plunge into this fantasy land, which has now resulted in all of these breakdowns, right? And it seems like that's accelerating. There's a clear acceleration of supply chain breakdowns, of energy infrastructure is being consciously removed from the support of the human economy. On top of all these crazy war dynamics, it seems like there are certain civilizational forces. I'm thinking principally of Iran and China that don't want to have World War III. They'd prefer not to have mass depopulation. I think also India would prefer not to. I would hope that there's sufficient people in Russia to also say they'd rather not see civilizational collapse, and hopefully people in the West also can wake up and realize why that would be a bad idea. Do you think that currently that are you optimistic? Is what I'm saying. Do you have any points of optimism, or are you kind of just withholding hope or fear for the time being and seeing how things pan out?
I think, no, funnily enough, although people here are suffering terribly, there is a sense of optimism.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, and I genuinely believe this, if you look at the ideology of Shia Islam, it is totally focused on protecting the oppressed. It's not about expansion. Sunni Islam has elements within it that is caliphatist, as I call it. Want to expand the caliphate, want to expand power and land and so on. And we've talked about this. There's not a lot of difference between, and Zionist support anyway, the Al-Qaeda, ISIS factions, Muslim Brotherhood factions that are effectively achieving land grab for them, right? And so when I look at the response from the killing of Imam Khamenei, it gave me hope. I think Trump and Israel and that entire cabal Epstein cabal really, were genuinely believing that this would lead to some out of control Armageddon, that the Iranians would lose their minds. But the reality is they haven't. And they've gone through the process of re-electing the next leader. And this entire leadership process has to go through an assembly of experts. It's not very similar to the Vatican and the election of the Pope. So therefore, it's not a done deal, right? In fact, the whole Iranian parliamentary governmental system is democratic when you compare it to the Gulf states. Saudi Arabia doesn't even have a constitution. None of them have a parliament. They are despots, basically. And when you look at the reaction now from within Iraq, from huge numbers of people, but also including the Iranian resistance factions, you look at how Hezbollah has responded. And as I said, everyone kind of wrote Hezbollah off. And for goodness sake, why not? Syria fell. They've got no supply line. Lebanon is a tiny country. And yet today they were firing ballistic missiles at Tel Aviv. I just find that absolutely extraordinary as well. And people forget that these people are ideologically driven. They're not driven by this kind of dynastic greed and ambition and imperialist lack of vision for the world, right? They're driven by a need just for justice and freedom and for this occupation and oppression globally to stop. And that's before you bring Yemen in. Yemen hasn't actually entered the war yet. They're holding back.
Right.
And you also have even the Syrian Arab army, more than 100,000 divided between Lebanon and Iraq. You've got resistance factions now rising up in Syria, in the northeast and in the south, targeting Israel in the Golan. So I think, I don't know, like for me, I feel like this is the war for humanity. Because if this, as you said, this lunatic cabal can be rooted out and weakened to a point where it has no choice but to negotiate on an equal footing, then we have a chance. That's
Vanessa
how I see
Beeley,
it. Because for the first time, someone's hit them back, Sorry.
oh, that's good. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for these wise words, this incredible briefing, and I look forward to future conversations with you. All of you, the links to your Substack and your social media feed, your Telegram is going to be in the description box under this video, so people should check that out. Give Vanessa a follow, support her work. Thank you so much, Vanessa.
Thanks, Matt.
Beyond Geopolitics is brought to you by the Rising Tide Foundation, with the goal of promoting deep structure analysis of the world with a look towards natural law and breaking free of zero-sum thinking. Thank you for watching and supporting this work.